Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Our next session today is Starting a Business, Opportunities to Bolster Minority Business Entrepreneurship. Joining us today, our moderator is Joseph M. Guzman. Dr. Guzman serves as an Associate Superintendent of Education for Assessment, Standards, Accountability, and Research under Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Horn. Joseph's research on minority entrepreneurship includes a chapter in the book I don't know how to pronounce that, I'm sorry. Acculturation and Latino-Owned Business Success, published by Purdue University. While serving as director of the NAU Economic Policy Institute, Joe was recognized by the Coconino Board of Supervisors and Northern Arizona Council of Governments for contributing to government stability and planning during COVID. His policy research experience includes having served 4 years as a think tank economist with the Center for Naval Analysis and the RAND Corporation. Joe is a graduate of the University of Arizona, having completed engineering and MBA degrees. He also holds a PhD in business administration and a master's degree in economics, statistics, and business research from Stanford University. Taniqua Broughton is the curator of Community Connection. As Chief Executive Officer of the State of Black Arizona, Taniqua advances the organization's mission of using actionable data to motivate our community, unite new partnerships and relationships, and create solutions. The evolution and paradigm shift of producing data-driven reports to raise awareness and incite action and accountability has been displayed throughout her tenure. Taniqua has a master's in educational administration and supervision, a bachelor's in interdisciplinary studies and educational psychology, emphasis on theater for youth, and garners certificates as a certified nonprofit accounting professional, or CNAP, nonprofit leadership and management, and equity and inclusion. Alicia Plemons is an economist and assistant professor in the Department of General Business at West Virginia University, where she holds several positions as the coordinator of Scope of Practice Policy and Research Fellow in the NE Regulatory Research Center, Research Fellow in the Hospitality Innovation and Technology Lab, and resident scholar of Data-Driven West Virginia. Her research has been published in several academic journals, including the British Journal of Industrial Relations, Journal of Health Economics, and Annals of Regional Science, and is regularly the subject of testimony in both state and federal legislatures. And finally, Jose Benito Rosales Chavez is an assistant professor at the School of Geological Sciences and Urban Planning here at ASU. He is a behavioral scientist with a background in anthropology, nutrition, and global health. Dr. Rosales Chavez's topics of interest intersect with community development, social justice, and health. More specifically, he studies the food environment, access to food, dietary intake, health outcomes, and social determinants of health. In his most recent projects, Dr. Rosales Chavez studies how culturally relevant food venues, including food stands, food trucks, and at-home cooking businesses, are linked to food and income security and well-being among ethnic communities. Please give our panel a warm applause. And take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. Gosh, I think one of the special things about this panel is that our panelists are so varied and diverse and distinct in their backgrounds, their activities, their interests. So I believe we're going to get a very balanced view, and we might even come up with some new things when you put these kinds of minds together. Second thing I want to start with is that we're here to examine opportunities for minority business growth. And there's a why behind that. Number one is small business is the engine of innovation and growth for the economy. We've always known that. And during COVID and coming out of COVID, we've all seen that minority business has been impacted severely. And so small business is an imperative that we're all responding to. And I think we agree. So with that, let me kick it off. Okay. A question for each of you to answer individually is, what do you, from your viewpoint, what is right with minority business opportunity? In other words, what is going well? Taniqua.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak on the panel and also be a participant in the conference. Before I go into that, Joseph, I first want to put a clarification because people may not know who the State of Black Arizona is, but it is a nonprofit that's been around in name since 2009 and supported by the ASU Foundation, but it became its own nonprofit in 2015. And I would say the best way to think about it is it's a data repository around issues and concerns as it relates to African Americans across the state. So we work heavily in Maricopa and Pima counties, and we really try to execute our work by providing reports and publications that really give anybody who is a decision maker or a leader an opportunity to make better decisions about our community, specifically because we are a smaller population in this state. So when I think about the question around what is going well or going right, what I feel like I am sensing today in what's kind of happened since we released our first State of Black Business report in partnership with the Greater Phoenix Economic Council is that people have been responding to how we can specifically help Black-owned business entrepreneurs and small business owners move forward with capital and or resources, I think, in a way that really, if you were doing it on your own prior, you either just figured it and navigated it yourself. Now we have a lot more partnerships, I think, in the community that I am finding, more incubator, more accelerator programs, as well as an opportunity for people to see that we have to customize a strategy for our community that works best versus onlaying what strategy may have worked well for maybe the dominant culture and or those who are people of color. And so what I have seen is that we are strategizing our ecosystem a little bit better to figure out how we can access capital that makes sense for growing businesses in the way that we want them and need them, as well as recognizing that we need to be connected to those growing industries and who wants to partner and co-create with us to be able to help us build up that ecosystem.
That's fantastic. So if I could pick a couple things out of what you just said, that you're seeing a rising awareness of the Black community and of the Black business community, and the need for unique approaches in certain cases and community-based approaches.
Absolutely, because I think the report itself gave people an awareness that, oh, what is the Black business ecosystem? What actually is helping us lift up and support our current, business and ecosystem? But more importantly, how do we make sure it's inclusive to everybody having an opportunity? And I felt like whether it's a financial institute, a CDC, a CDFI, any kind of economic authority, people are trying to figure out ways in which we just don't take something we've already had and name it specifically with a particular ethnicity, but what do we do? How do we take different ingredients and customize something that actually can make more business owners successful, as well as grow more employer firms in our particular state, because we are not to parity.
That's great. Thank you so much, Taniqua. Next, Alicia.
Well, the question is what's going right. Unfortunately, a lot of the time I can tell you maybe what's not going right.
I know we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But focusing from the idea of what's going right in relation to inspiring and encouraging and innovating within minority businesses, I'm going to say from the point of a data scientist, communities are finally listening in a way that they hadn't before. So a lot of what I do is, there were a lot of cities and states that I work with who said, hey, we really want to work with minority businesses and we want more of them. And then they had no answers after that. Where's the data? Where are people located right now? What policies are working so far? What policies aren't working? How can we do these sorts of things? So a lot of what I've done is I build data sets to be able to help track minority businesses, business ownership, where we see large amounts of growth, what policies are happening in these growth areas, so that these policymakers can be better informed. And I think some of them are listening. For example, I work with the Latino Roundtable of St. Louis pretty often, and they've really tried to encourage Hispanic-owned businesses. I've worked with Charleston, South Carolina on Black-owned businesses. So I think just even being able to process data and have that data available and have people look at it is a step. I'm not going to say everything's perfect. It's not perfect. But it's at least being able to see what's there, so now we can see how to help.
That's great. That's great. And again, I started out with, if we put two great minds together, 3 or 4, you might get some unique things. And I think that we wouldn't have expected such similar answers in the sense of awareness and rising interest.
I'm going to download your data set when I get home.
Yes.
That sounds cool.
We need to be connected.
I had to really hold back to not take notes on what you guys were saying because it was great. Jose, would you please?
Yeah, so like I was mentioned, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a privilege to be here. So I study food venues and access to food, but I focus on informalized food venues, food trucks, food stands. And one of the things that is going well, there's a lot of things that still could be improved, is that people are becoming more aware of them, right? They exist, especially if you go to Latino communities. I mean, if you want to have a good taco stand in South Phoenix where I live, and there's a Latino community, I can tell you where they are. But they're still at this weird intersection where everybody wants to regulate them. You have from transit, in the city, transit systems, we have the public health officials, we have environmental offices, they all want to regulate them. And then it's hard to navigate that process. But nowadays, it could be, there's a number of reasons why they're becoming more popular. I mean, you go to streaming services and you have shows about street food, not here in the US, but also abroad, that's becoming more popularized. Governments are starting to realize that they are a potential for revenue generation. As there's a source of economic security, there's a source of food security. So some cities, you can think of LA, where recently they created a pathway for legalization that now some of the business owners can actually go and apply and get a permit, whereas before it was completely illegal to do that. We see that in New York, there's a high demand for some of these permits, that they're trying to create more permits. Even though it's a slow process, they're trying to realize that, okay, there's people who need this type of business, who are proud in this type of business, let's help them have a pathway for legalization, and that's something that is happening. And then, I mean, if you go across different cities, they have all sorts of different regulations, and some of them are more welcome to the idea of street food vendors, but in some other cities, not so much.
And again, now we're talking rising acceptance of food trucks and mobile venues. That was, I don't know which was the first place where it became most accepted or prevalent, but I remember in the old days in Tucson when we had a few trucks, and they were all on the south side, and then there was one that would park right outside of Hughes, now Raytheon, and it was there all the time. But it was very limited. It was a very limited scope. Even there, it's like they had a territory, and that was it. And that's totally changed now.
Yeah, I mean, and the main difference here, I study in Mexico City. That's my main my research site, and over there we don't really have food trucks. Food truck is more an American phenomenon, and that I think also has to do with our streets. I mean, our society is primarily car focused, and that'd be one of the reasons. But nowadays we see one of the, I guess, things that's happening, that our community is more likely to welcome food trucks, that people who have push cars, bicycles, tricycles, golf carts in some cases, and puts in actual stands on the sidewalks. But that's some of the things that you can see in other countries, not just Latin America, Asian countries, African countries, very popular.
I'm thinking of the little cart now, right?
The little cart.
In Spanish, it's called paleteros.
Or elote man,
the popsicles.
Yep,
that sort of thing. So the scale is it runs quite a range. So let me continue just for another moment the focus on what's going well, or what we would like to see more of. And that's different from what's going well already, because there could be some low-hanging fruit. But what do you think would be the immediate low-hanging fruit in expanding minority business opportunity and actual business creation and success? And let me go in a slightly different order. Alicia.
So, things that I think are going well and could maybe be better for driving opportunities for minority-owned businesses is a wide variety of different regulatory policy reform. For example, we've worked very frequently with different groups who do hair braiding that are being asked to go to cosmetology school for 2,000 plus hours, where hair braiding is not covered at all. It's just services that they are not going to be performing, which really shuts down many of these businesses, to the point where they're also extremely over-enforced. There was, in the state of Florida, SWAT teams that went in on to people's houses stopping hair braiders in a particular neighborhood once. It was a wild story. So there are many things like that that I think we really need big improvements on, is identifying where are the regulatory policies that may not be making sense and how can we address those. For example, is this a skill that is relevant to this particular job? You've heard about the DBNA a lot today. I love this data set because it has some really important variables for being able to understand minority opportunities, or opportunities for minority communities in relation to what sort of the tax schemes there, what are the land use policies, what are many of these things that might be giving more power to people who have been there for a long time or may have already established the businesses that are stopping minority businesses from being able to flourish or enter new communities or enter new areas. So I think really thinking seriously about these policies and going through one by one to find out which ones are encouraging minority businesses and which ones are keeping them from being successful is a really important step that I'd like to see more of.
That's excellent, excellent. And so again, I'm picking up commonality here in regulation, ease of regulation, and the regulatory reform. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that in the coming minutes. But so Taniqua,
Yeah.
please.
I'm going to go back to the word that Alicia said, which is listening. I use awareness, but listening has really been key to not only having the data, but then actually making sure that you've processed what it is and then being able to not act upon it just on your own for the community, but allowing the community itself to move forward. So when I think about what could be better, even though there are opportunities that are working to break this barrier, is startup capital. Access to startup capital. So I think about it as a foundational thing. So if a lot of minority businesses are using their own personal equity to start the business, then either they're tapping into their own personal savings and or wealth, as well as they're taking out loans, either predatory loans, unfortunately, in some cases, or not able to get that money from traditional banks. And so if there's an opportunity to think about where we can make improvements, how do we help? And I don't want to say govern, but to a degree, supporting businesses who want to start in the right way with that capital up front, whether it comes from a CDFI, just an opportunity to be able to access it so that they are not using their own personal capital to do it. And then just along those lines, too, really being able to focus on moving into the growing industries of our own state. So a lot of the businesses, specifically in my community, are low capital, kind of low barriers to starting a business, which unfortunately does have low revenues, to then thinking about how that helps support the ecosystem. So how do we help people see those spaces in manufacturing, construction, real estate, where they can build out so that we can do some wealth, I'm gonna say wealth creation versus wealth building, because we are decades and centuries behind. So how do we help with that creation is what I'm thinking about. So the capital from the beginning is the foundation, and if we can get that to increase, hopefully that will keep a trajectory of our businesses going beyond the 10 years than people dying off really early in that 5 to 7 year time frame.
Enterprises dying off.
Yeah.
Because many enterprises succeed after a few attempts.
Absolutely.
Too, if you stick with it.
And I've heard that from people saying, maybe the first or the second venture didn't, but two, you have to have the resilience to be able to want to do that, and I think also the support to understand how to do that.
One of my favorite examples is Sam Walton from Walmart. He declared bankruptcy over 10 times.
Yep.
Finally succeeded after 50. Now, you dovetailed beautifully, though, into what I was going to ask next, and that is, what can we do to get minority enterprise into innovation, tech, and not just innovation and tech, but scaling? In other words, even if it's a moderate or low-tech industry, how can we support the growth so that the minority enterprise can replicate itself and grow in a large fashion. A lot of the most successful enterprises have not necessarily been strictly tech, but they've managed to replicate themselves and scale at great benefit to the principals. So let me now start with Jose.
Yeah, so I'm thinking creating those, going back to what you were saying, creating some of those opportunities and making sure that when you are, so for instance, if you're changing some of those regulations, that take a step back and see, is it going to benefit everybody? Because sometimes you go and change them to facilitate some of the processes, but you exclude some individuals from taking full advantage of that. So I can think of a case of Chicago when 2008, when the economic crisis happened, and a lot of chefs, gourmet chefs, lost their businesses. They saw food trucks as an opportunity to generate money because it was a low startup, and so they changed the policies and they lobbied the Congress to change the policies to allow them in the cities, but at the same time, they still were discriminating against, the policies were discriminating against some of the push cart vendors. So in a sense, going back to your question, I think that something that I've seen, one of the challenges, how to, to manage what you're making, being able to have that account of how much goes in, how much goes out, being able to provide resources so they can fully understand the process and then potentially scale up to have more businesses. So potentially right now you own a food stand, perhaps you can move on to a food truck next, and then having a couple of those where you can now, you own one and now you have other people helping you manage the other ones. And I think that could be an opportunity. But first, I think sometimes, because some of the populations that I work with might have come from other countries and then they didn't have that training, they had to change gears and start now selling street food, they might not have the business or economic background to be able to know how to manage and how to make it thrive and now expand to others. Because oftentimes, if you talk to some of the food stand vendors, some of them don't really want a brick and mortar business. They don't want to deal with all the formalization that goes and all the the permits and everything that goes into it. They would like to have maybe a couple of stands in different strategic locations to help them generate some of that income. But again, one of those things with my the group of people that I work with is the policies, the outlining and zoning ordinances, do they facilitate that? Right? That's something that we can start with too, seeing where they can be in the city and can we change that so they can have access.
So Jose, that's a fantastic point. A couple of things to pull from it is, one is you, as a business principal, as an entrepreneur, sometimes your success relies on doing everything well. In other words, you might be the great chef, or you might even be the great carpenter, or the great electrician, or the great designer. But if you don't do those other things well, sometimes they're taken for granted. Your business is at risk. So. Being aware of that, and also I know that there are times when some businesses pull out of the U.S. or are suppressed here because our regulatory environments can be sort of more than they're expecting, and so it's a great point. So let me continue on with Alicia.
So really encouraging enterprise, I think, is also coming from a point of just being able to understand what's going on currently. And I think some of it is related to cultural competence. And this is something that I am trying to learn and understand myself, because I realize that I don't come from that same background of understanding what a lot of these specific challenges are. So I spend a lot of time talking to business owners from different communities to try to understand what their problems were. And I think what you said about financing is really important and really underplayed, because there's a lot of very systemic things that come from regulatory policies that have been around for 200 years that make it so it's harder to be able to get business loans within certain neighborhoods that were redlined, or a lot of the time there's a lot of immigrant communities that just have a different form of ways that they think about home ownership, and whose name do they put on it? How does this affect the ability for maybe the woman in that partnership to be able to get a loan if there's a different structure to how households are? So these are things that I think it's really important to understand, that different communities may be different housing styles might be different, and that when we're thinking about finance, maybe it's time to take a broader look at ability to get financing, because there might be more systemic or cultural barriers that are not being accounted for in that loan process.
And what do you think about the challenges of entering the tech market, or the growth through moderate success and then building on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. When it comes to technology specifically, I think a lot of it has to do with education related to technology integration. And that's probably a story that starts long before some of the things that are studied here, like the regulatory pathways. This comes all the way back to like education, access, ability to be able to be in environments where you're really taught to learn this technology, to integrate this technology. And I think it starts from when people are children, to when you see that eventual technology integrated into businesses later and the success of that. So I think it's really, we got to start targeting a lot earlier of saying, hey, you have all the opportunities in here, there's opportunities for you to learn, master the skill, keep going, and really engage in technology and technology fields.
That's great. You know, one of the things I've observed is that in other countries, there are a lot of math champions, and they're females, and there are math champions coming out of areas. We're talking about early education and a portal into technology, coming out of very poor areas of Latin America, and winning global math championships. And I said, why can't we do that here? So it'd be wonderful to crack that nut. I'm working on it.
So Joseph, I'm thinking about it from just some recent experiences with some Black tech founders. So first of all, in Arizona, we want to attract and or cultivate technology companies here. We have said that and been very clear about that. But what I have noticed specifically in my particular community, we gather quarterly in support with JP Morgan Chase. We have been bringing in Black founders who are $1 million, $2 million plus, and have found that when it comes to venture capital, they're not getting it here. Well, first of all, venture capital here is relatively already small. I think it's 1% or less than 1%. So when I think about being able to start a business and wanting to do some wealth creation, this means that individuals who are successful in their business are not getting that capital even from their own state. They're getting it from surrounding states to start their business. So there's two thoughts. One, what are the availabilities around accelerator programs specifically for minority-owned businesses specifically, and tech? And I know one just platform immersion. Nathan Harris is moving that forward, and I really love that has come out of support from AZ Tech. But my other thought process around like this, when I think about it, is how are we growing our own soil? So if people can come here and start a business, but yet get the venture capital from other places, will they start that, and then will they take it, and will they leave? And so when I think about it, that is an opportunity, but yet it is a challenge around thinking about the growing industry and how we want people to actually stay here, but then how are we supporting them with that opportunity at the same time?
That's so very, very insightful, because we know the venture hubs have been the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley, and then the Austin area as well.
Yep.
And let me just introduce a sub-question then. What could Phoenix, with its great trajectory and concentration of tech companies, do to become the next venture hub? Can you think of anything besides just throwing money at it? I mean,
yeah, it's not just about throwing money at it, because we saw a lot of money being thrown at. I feel like after things happened with George Floyd, and while some things have sustained itself, a lot of it has gone away. And so we're looking for solutions and strategies that can sustain itself, or be sustainable, than just saying we committed to it as a transaction. and being much more intentional. And so it's a great, I think, roundtable conversation to have. I don't have the answer, but I think the answers come by trying to figure out what the solutions are. And it also comes from trying more than one time and understanding that there will be pitfalls and challenges when you're trying to navigate something specific for different groups of people in a way that is not a traditional model that is easy maybe just to fit into who is the majority.
Commitment. So that was a part 2 of the question. So Jose or Alicia, if you'd like to add anything to that, please.
I think thinking about growing up too and the type of businesses that I know some community members do, I think it's also like the life of exposure to some of those opportunities, I think. And like you were saying, like it should start earlier, potentially with STEM fields, right, in school, being able to teach them, hey, there's the opportunities within the tech business that you could potentially do. And I think it should start earlier, but at the same time, we're so limited. We're in sometimes the education system that at what point can you have those opportunities? And unfortunately, right now, like sometimes our younger generations ended up taking the business that their parents are doing, and that often is not really related to tech or innovation.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a general problem. So let me ask another question here. And I think since the early days of focus on minority enterprise, I'll go back to 1968 when the 8A laws were created for minority business access. There's been this thought that I think has never really reached beyond that minorities should be a big advantage to the U.S. in exporting and working in foreign sectors. And there are 2 needs here. One is minority enterprise needing to grow, and the other is that we vitally need to have more exports from our country. Alicia, let me throw that one at you first.
Are you picking on me because I'm an economist?
No, because you're the middle.
Well, you are the one that knows the regulations.
That's fair. I do know the regulations on this one. So I'm going to give a little bit of my personal opinion and then a little bit of like my professional data opinion. Yes. My personal opinion is why you have a country that has a lot of lacking in having population growth. You have a country who is not necessarily exporting a lot of things right now, and manufacturing is relatively lacking. Do you know how to fix both of those 2 problems? Is encourage immigration, encourage minority-owned businesses, and minority-owned businesses to not only be able to like exist, but to how do you help them expand? How do you work with many of these businesses? How do you develop minority enterprise and make it go even further? Especially related to things that may not be as I know we went to tech dependence earlier, but not as much tech dependence as well, because there are so many communities throughout the United States, especially among immigrant communities, that are extremely good at manufacturing, that just have really innovative and cool things that they're producing that they've had problems scaling. Whether it be a finance issue, whether it be a support issue, whether it be some sort of cultural issue where there's too many barriers for individuals. One way to really increase this idea of export is either through the technology pathway of encouraging education, wonderful, awesome, but also being able to think about finance and encouraging immigrant communities and communities of color to be able to make what's beautiful to them and be able to sell it without having many different borders and regulatory policies stopping them again and again and again, because that's got to be exhausting.
Back to regulation.
Yeah.
Back to regulation. Jose. Minority exports.
I agree with you. I think sometimes too, and that's one of the issues too that we have, that we are able to manufacture so many things, but unless someone who is not part of that community finds it and makes it hip, right, it gets stuck in there. So I think it's being able to facilitate connections, maybe relax some of the regulations to be able to do that. I know so many ideas that that was, and going back to the food truck, that the lonchera was, that was the Latino-based food truck that used to go to construction sites, and after 2008 also became a fusion gourmet truck, and now it's so popular, but all the Latino ones are left out. And so that's an idea that was ours in the community, but we figure out how to export it. And I think that's one of being able to relax some of the regulations or connecting communities with a person that could potentially, if they don't have the knowledge, could potentially link them to others to be able to facilitate the process.
Excellent, excellent. Taniqua, what do you think about that? Minority enterprise and exports or participating in that market?
I feel like they covered it really well. The only thing that I would add, when I think about it is, when I think about regulation, like, have we tested, because Alicia said it a lot, is it working for some or is it working for all? And a lot of time, is it working to keep us out or is it working to bring us in? And so I look at it as, yes, we need governance, but if it is actually only benefiting a certain group of people or excluding a certain group of people or creating unnecessary barriers that don't help, then we're not going to be able to move that space forward, or maybe we don't want to move that space forward. I would hope we would, but I see it as if we're trying to move this space forward, it may have to be in teams and groups. So I go back to the use of the word around like co-creation, bringing businesses together to be able to approach that in the sense of moving that forward versus we all have to work to figure that out on our own and be burdened by some of the challenges that have been put in place around the regulations.
It's difficult to do that on your own, right?
It
There's
absolutely.
so many regulations on both sides sometimes. And also the familiarity with the markets that you might be trying to go into.
Correct, where someone else may have a stronger understanding and sense, so while they have that stronger understanding and sense, whether it be business and you or the talent, I just feel like trying to navigate it alone in the way that things are designed right now may not be beneficial for minority businesses. So if we have to work collective and collaboratively, we also have to do that in navigating some of our business aspects the same way to be able to move forward successfully.
Excellent. I think now one of the things I think that Alicia was alluding to is foreign enterprises are sometimes very, very, very efficient, not just because of the regulatory environment. Sometimes also they have the luxury to fail, and we have to be mindful of that if we want to compete. Now, let me not double up on you, and I'll pick on you next. That is, where do you think that if we're looking at solutions, which direction should we be looking? Should we be looking to government, to the business sector, or to the nonprofit sector? Where are the immediate solutions, or where are our next steps going to come from?
So I'm going to say this. I think there's going to be a myriad of solutions, and I don't think it's going to come from one particular place, but I do think it's going to have to be a collective effort of being able to continue to listen and be aware of how each of those structures within the ecosystem can pivot, change, or reinvest in the way that can be more exclusive. That's just, so whether it be local government, whether it be economic authority, whether it be financial institutions, whether it be, local accelerator programs, I think we all have to figure out what's our shift, what's our paradigm shift when we think about what we have to do. And it can't be this one will just take care of it for us. Each of us have to figure out what the role is, and so it's not one over the other, it's all of us doing that. And that means you're going to have the type of people on your team who want to be solutions oriented to be able to figure that out as the experts and or navigator or practitioners of that work.
Excellent, excellent. Jose, let me ask you to take that one on. Where should we be looking? I know you're at the university, and we're definitely in the business of research, but where should we be looking for those immediate next solutions or immediate next steps?
No, I agree with you. I don't think there's one place where the solution is from. I think, and I like what you're saying, like co-creation. I think everyone needs to come to the table and talk about the challenges and opportunities, because I can think of the term positionality, where we all have a piece of information, we have different experiences. Perhaps my solution may not fit with others, but we all come together and discuss and talk, and then try to test it, see if that works, talk to community members. I think that's where we can gain the most ground, because if we try to, my background is in nutrition, and if you can think of in public health, and most recently here in Arizona, we have the tamale bill, which was passed by Congress, but our governor vetoed it, and that was surprising, right? So where is that coming from? And one of the arguments was, well, it could potentially make people sick. Well, is it going to do that? It's still happening. You said no, but people are going to still be able, they're going to continue to do that business, even though you're saying that it's not legal, they're going to continue to do that. So in that case, everybody needs to come to the table and talk about, okay, what could be a potential negative effect of this policy or regulation? What are the benefits? But again, I think it takes people stop working in silos and talking to each other. Because I've been in many teams where I'm in my team with the city of Phoenix and a team with the city of Tempe. They're doing the same project, but they're not talking to each other. Like, how is it that you're not talking? It's the same thing that you're doing. You're using extra resources for the same outcome, but you're not communicating. So we need to communicate across. And I don't think it's just one body of a group of people who's going to have a solution. It has to be a combination of everybody.
And there's many examples of where that happens, right? Broadband comes to mind, rural broadband. Lisa, if you'd like to take a shot at that question, great, but I might have another one for you.
I will do the typical academic thing where I say, I had a study recently where we looked specifically at wealth generation and income growth within families. So how well your parents do, and then how well you end up doing next, and then how well your kids end up doing, and is there a lot of economic mobility and income mobility and wealth generation happening? So what we spent a lot of time doing was analyzing this for everybody, but then also for different ethnic and racial communities. We found that a lot of the things that we had really been focused on, oddly, like social connectivity, different sort of more social-based policies, they were helpful. But the ones that we found that actually had the largest, not only growth for everybody in rates of income mobility and wealth generation, but actually had much larger effects for some groups that were historically marginalized for years, were things related to making the tax codes more efficient, so that you don't have as many different groupings in them, making it just easier to have the taxes for your business processed. By doing things related to where directed government spending is when it came to different types of policies of being able to put money back into your communities and focusing on putting the money into your communities as opposed to particular projects. Finding those, I think, is really important because we're finding particular ways that things are already being done that really encourages this sort of wealth generation. So I think that that's where to start, is finding each of those.
That's a great capstone to the three of yours input. Now, let me double up on you, Alicia. In terms of measurement, metrics, your specialty, how should we measure success in the future?
That's tough. I don't think that's for me to decide. I just collect the data. But I can tell you what people who I've talked to care about. There's a group or a cluster of Korean-owned businesses in my area that really care about, do their kids leave? Do their kids leave? Do they go have successful businesses elsewhere? Or are they getting past this family-owned business into their own successful venture? That's what success looks like to them. Okay, that's great. We can now visualize that. Maybe success looks like being able to not only grow new businesses, but expand businesses at a particular rate, or have wealth generation in between different groups that ends up being more favorable than it was in previous generations. So it's not up to me what success looks like. I'm just going to build the data so people can look for that types of success.
That's a great point, because I recall a presentation I gave to the Fed a few years ago where we were looking at Latino-owned businesses and their ability or desire to expand, and many of them didn't want to. They didn't want the complexity of that. They were supporting their family, and their livelihood was going well, and that was great for them.
That's awesome. If that's the measure of success, I can give you the data to tell you if that's happening or not.
Yeah. Jose, what do you think we should be looking at in terms of measures of success or hoping for?
I have to agree with you because I think success is subjective. It depends. I mean, I'm not an economist, but I think like when in my field, I see that often economists think that, you know, if you're a food vendor, you're selling at stand, success for you is going to be that you have your own brick and mortar business, but that's not what they want. Sometimes that stand has been there for generations, and for them, success is being able to keep the stand open, to have the same clients come, you know, year after year, to be able to send the kids to school, and I think it just depends on who you're talking to, and often we want to see success in a linear trend, but it doesn't have to be linear. There's so many ways that someone could go and define what success is.
That's great. But Tanico, I know you have measures of success. Tell me some of them.
So I have to be the different person on the panel because running a
No,
nonprofit.
we're on the same side.
Like, yeah, I have to have some type of measure of success. So, you know, what's been interesting is while I do agree with what both other panelists have said around it's subjective to the community and who has made that decision factor. For us, we have put together reports where we want people to respond. And it's considered actionable data because we want you to see yourself within it and how you can figure out how best you can move forward with whatever aspect of the work we've laid out as a recommendation. So for us, when I think about just this past August, we dropped our third version of our State of Black Business Report. Now being 3 years later, we could attest that people actually did respond to the recommendations. So I could say X amount of accelerator programs that were not in place are now in place, or incubator programs. I could also say financial institutions have made efforts and or to partner with certain Black CDFIs to be able to be a bridge between what they can or cannot do. I also was able to say we are in the process of putting together a Black business database, which is underway. And I was able to say that there were just a myriad of different data points that maybe before weren't necessarily moving the needle, moved maybe a point or two since that time. And that for us was success. So I am not doing the reports because they just need to be beautiful printed things that we put our coffee on, but that they are things that we are responsive to so that when we say, why is this happening, we have somewhere to look back and then we work to make those decisions. And so I want to just do a clarification because we both mentioned co-creation, and I want to make sure people understand co-creation is not creating for a group. It is with the group, and it is ideally what they say that they need with you, even if you are the ones that hold the purse strings. And so that is important because otherwise you're creating over us or on top of us, and not really with us. And ultimately, it's the same myriad of programs that are still happening, just with a different race that's tied to the title. So that's mine.
Thank you for that answer. That's fantastic. Now, let me give you all one more question, and that is in the spirit of problems being opportunities. I'll begin with Jose. What is the greatest opportunity right now for minority business? And going back to the headline of our panel.
Right now, I think, thinking about specifically what my area of expertise, I think,
yes,
being able to frame it in a way that can, bring the interests of multiple stakeholders. So within the street food stands business, right, you can frame it from economic opportunity, economic growth. You can frame it from the food security and health aspects. So being able to find a way that you can frame it that it's going to attract the more support to be able to then being able to show to the stakeholders, the people making decisions, hey, this is something that is going to benefit me, it's going to be my community in these multiple ways, and then we think about data, that could have the data and the support that then you need to be able to say, okay, let's go and either relax regulations or create regulations that could benefit you and benefit the most people in that sense.
Food security is important to everyone, right? But it's really not important unless you don't have it. Then it becomes much more important. Alicia, what could you say about that?
I'm going to give Arizona a compliment on this one. I told myself I wasn't going to talk about licensing because that's typically what I talk about all the time, and y'all heard it in every panel, but we're going to anyways.
But it's an opportunity, yeah.
So when Arizona was the first one to really put in universal licensing recognition, there was a benefit to it that I don't think people realized was going to happen when the policy change happened. And that's that there were originally a lot of these licenses that required citizenship. For example, in construction, there were a lot of like general construction jobs that didn't require citizenship, but the management level jobs were requiring citizenship, right? Which was really stopping some people from being able to move upwards. So one thing that happened with universal licensing recognition meant that they were accepting licenses from other states that did not have the citizenship requirement. So all of a sudden, you were able to see a lot more immigrant participation in new jobs throughout Arizona and also the other states who have brought in ULR, which is also bringing in more minority-owned businesses to the area because now there's a whole bunch of new jobs that people are able to get into that they weren't able to 5 years ago just because of legal limits. So I think that's a really good, important piece of opportunity that like people haven't looked at, but it seems to be really important.
Excellent, excellent. So minority entrepreneurs in other places who are licensed come to Arizona, right? Taniqua.
So the first thing I'm going to say is just having this conversation to me is an opportunity. Not that conversations like this wasn't happening before, but I think in the way and the caliber and thinking about the diversity of the panels and our experiences, while we still have different roles, we still have synergies around how we are responding to it. So that in itself, one I want to point out, which I think says a lot around those who are in this room who are decision makers. Hopefully it helps you think about how you can be a better decision maker around whatever program, organization, idea, opportunity, or investment that you want to have. I think the other part that I'm really excited about is like, I live in a state where I can start a business. So not only do I run the state of Black Arizona, I actually am a business owner myself. I have my own consulting firm. I will hit 10 years next year, and it has been because I've recognized what the opportunity and resources are here. So I think if you want to start a business, this is a place that you can do that. And what I love is that if you don't know, ASU does have programs and workshops where you can be like, what kind of business do I want to start? How do I start my business? Is it going to be a nonprofit? Is it going to be an LLC? What will it be? And so to me, the opportunity that we just have to talk about the opportunity is great. And in a city where there is space to be able to do that. So it is really about what you say you want to do, and then acting upon that, to me, is the opportunity at this point.
What a great capstone to my questions. And I think this is a good time to invite some questions from the audience. Yes, microphone.
My name is my question to the panel is, what is the purpose of a regulation? What is the purpose of a regulation, and what should it be in order for it to be efficient and helpful instead of hurtful and damaging?
So I'm sorry, could you repeat? So what is the purpose of a regulation?
Yeah.
And what
So
should that
I'll just
purpose
start from the beginning, if that's okay.
Sure.
My name is Victor Solorio, ASU student. So my question for the panel is, what is the purpose of a regulation, and what should it be in order for it to be efficient and helpful instead of harmful and damaging?
Okay, great. So who would like to take that first?
I can take that, if it's okay with y'all.
I think it's okay with us.
Yeah, so my PhD's in public economics, specifically on the analysis of regulations and like when regulations are useful versus when they're harmful. So that's what I just spent like 10 years of my life studying to become a doctor. So I can tell you this. There's a lot of ideas about it, but here's what the general trend is. If something is causing a huge externality. It's really harming other people who didn't make that decision. That's when we find that regulation is really efficient. When it's there for quality, when it's there for safety, when it's minimizing those externalities that might be harming people. The ones that we find rather inefficient are the ones that are causing externalities. So the ones that might be keeping people from being able to start businesses, or keeping people out of the labor force, or keeping people from being able to be paid for their services. So that's when we start to see really inefficient regulations. So everything that we do is trying to figure out mathematically which bin is that in. But that's basically what the general piece is this for the purpose of quality and safety, and is the changes in access and cost worth that quality and safety? Or is it, on the other hand, something that might be harming the economic opportunities and economic connections of especially marginalized groups? If that's happening, that's probably not a good regulatory policy. Then that's one that we need to address, we need to look at, we need to think about what could improve and how can it be improved.
And often regulations, it's not apparent what the externality will be.
Right.
Oh no, that's why we spend years studying it. You never know, like it was the example earlier today. When sugar taxes went in, or sugar import tariffs went in, eventually that ended up affecting the corn industry, and then down the road, because of corn syrup, and then down the road, because corn is being overproduced and the prices are different, that affects beef production. From there, that affects the performance of different restaurants. So it's a very interconnected piece of thinking, what are the actual effects of these changes?
Excellent.
And it's a lot of time.
Daniqua, I gather you had some
I
thoughts
feel like
about that?
Alicia covered it.
She covered it.
Well, she's the expert.
Yes, she is.
Oh, y'all are the expert. I just like doing the math.
No, I think that you completely cover everything that needs to be done, but I also think like sometimes when they're done and they're applied to something that doesn't fit the model. So I can think of an example that I use for my classes where California and the agricultural sector, that there are regulations that try to protect farm workers that sometimes doesn't apply to smaller, and I'm thinking about corporations, large farms, that don't apply to smaller farms. Think about the case of the Hmong cultural group, where it's part of their culture to bring their family members, immediate and extended family members during harvesting time to harvest. It brings the family together, creates strong social ties, but because of the regulations, now they can't do that, and because now every single member who comes to help has to be insured. So that's a model that it was created to protect farm workers from abuses from large corporations, that has been applied to a small farm owner where it doesn't really fit the model, and that's what creates that negative externality. Well, now you're impacting my social networks, my way of living. And I think that's also when you gotta really take a step back and say, okay, is that the purpose that we meant for that regulation, or should we relax it, or just change it to have, I guess, exemptions?
Yeah, great point, Jose. Over application and sometimes creep in the regulations. Do you have any other questions from the floor? Okay, barring none. Let me just give you each, because I think, was there one?
I don't want to occupy the space, but no one can ask.
Okay.
Hi, so I might have misheard, but I believe I heard someone say that you're a communist. Were they exaggerating, or is that a joke? If not, I respect your belief, but... Oh, okay, economist. Okay, sorry, I misheard.
Pretty close.
No. I'm an economist at West Virginia University, where I work in a regulatory center where we study different regulations.
Okay. Well, overall, you have come off as very reasonable, so it's like I wasn't gonna harass you about it or anything. But that's cool. Actually, I want to get a PhD in economics. I love economics so much. I want to be a political economy researcher. But yeah, I'd love to talk to you guys individually afterwards, and I have a LinkedIn too.
I'm taking students if you're interested.
Your research assistant or anything that I can help out.
You'll love West Virginia, admit that. So, I think you'll all agree that this panel, and because of it, yes.
Yeah, just wanted to ask.
Oh, great.
I wanted to ask on food trucks. In Puerto Rico, the food trucks, very typical of Latin America, it becomes a self-employment kind of means, and usually it's for people from low incomes that cannot overcome the barriers, right? However, they're almost non-existent now because the government, municipalities and government went after them because the business sector ask for them to be pushed out because they were, competing.
Yeah.
They started in constructions, typical, so no one bothered because no one was playing in those markets. And then there is less construction, so they moved to nearby areas that there may be a bunch of fast foods nearby. And so those businesses complained that there was unfair competition, right? So what I wanted to ask is, have you seen something similar, and what are the counter arguments to what could be a fair argument that you're not regulating them similarly, and they don't have the same, regulatory costs than the established ones? How do you counter those arguments?
I think it depends on the context, right? So for instance, in Latin American cities and other low and middle income countries, street foods are an urban necessity. There's not enough of the established restaurants and other food venues to support large urban dense populations. So in the case of Mexico City, you see food stands right outside restaurants. And are they competing? Are they complementing? In some cases, it's both. And in some of these settings, sometimes they're being displaced from the streets because of the business owner saying that was an unfair competition. They're not paying the same amount of permits or taxes that I have to pay. I think here in the U.S., I'm in the School of Planning, and often planners are responsible for the removal of vendors on the street sidewalks, the beautification campaigns where our tourists don't want to see clutter on the street. They want to see nice, beautiful streets that people can walk or exercise or do anything else but commerce. And I think that's why food trucks are more popular, because they're not really on the sidewalks, they're on the actual street. But I think it depends on, in New York, we see this often where they try to, take places on parking meters. And they pay for the parking meter, but then community members, especially more affluent communities, they don't want them there, and they are within their right to, get them removed. And that's a constant struggle that some of these vendors have. Even though they have the permits to be there, they have to, face some of those unwelcoming environments. But at the same time, they are, for someone that generates enough income, they're willing to get the tickets that they have to get from transit and others, because there's the economic opportunity is there. And that's, like you mentioned, for many community members, that's the low startup that it takes to own one of these businesses is what's very attractive to the business, and continue to do that.
Very good. Any other questions from the floor? Okay, so I just want to thank the panel. You've far exceeded my expectations, and I had high ones for all of you because it's such a diverse group with your different approaches, and I think those different approaches that were thoughtful also led, I think, to some great commonality in your answers. So let me just offer you a moment to offer some closing comments, and I'll begin with Niqua.
Oh, thank you. First of all, thank you for those who are out in the virtual space for listening, and then those who are here for just listening. This conversation is so important, I think, to the state we live in, the Grand Canyon state as we call it. And so when we think about where we live, we work, we play, does everybody have that opportunity to do that as an entrepreneur? Do they have the opportunity to have a full life? Do they have the opportunity to change things through the type of business that they have for their own communities? And I think we live in a state that if we encourage, support, and make sure people have the visibility for those resources, they can do that. So I leave to you today is, what can you share with somebody else that wants to start a business that may not know they have the opportunity in this state? Make it happen for them, because you have the ability to share what you learned today.
Fantastic. Now, Alicia, let me thank you in advance for promoting Arizona and for finding some really good things that distinguish us from other states. But final comments, please.
My final comment is just, please use good data.
Yeah. Yes.
As someone who, I'm basically spending my entire career trying to build more representative data, just realize who's in your data set. Is this a data set that might be rather biased? Is it actually going to be reflective of what's happening within that community? Is it going to be reflective of the voices of minority business owners or people who might want to own a business or any of these other things? Is your data representative? And when collecting data, to also think about that. So just as the role of a data scientist, use good data. It's really important to really get all the economic influences, not just one voice.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And Jose, please offer
Well,
some
first of all,
thoughts
thank you
here.
for the opportunity. For me, I think I would say that if you had the opportunity to eat, on a, if you choose a restaurant or a street food vendor, please, that some of this food in any city that you find them, these are foods that are culturally relevant. They're most of the time they're local foods. They're supporting local businesses, local families who own them. So I ask if you have opportunity, go and have something amazing outside.
Wonderful. Let's all give them a hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you.